In a remote Colorado cabin, a body lies on a kitchen table dressed in old white linen, two silver coins pressed into the eyes, the right foot crushed inside an iron boot. The corpse has been embalmed. Toxicology confirms it happened while he was still alive. Then the medical examiner opens the stomach. It's packed with half-digested communion wafers and wine, each wafer stamped with the Lamb of Christ, every single one traceable to a convent in Italy that has never sold them in North America. Meanwhile, in Rome's Basilica of San Silvestro, a fragment of the skull of John the Baptist has been cut from its wax reliquary and stolen. That sliver of bone crosses the Atlantic and lands in the path of the same killer who left the shrouded body on the table. Sacred, an investigator, secretly sends the bone for DNA sequencing. The geneticist runs it 6 times and cannot sleep afterward. The sample is 2,000 years old. It looks as though someone manufactured it, he says. But no existing technology can synthesize a complete human genome. That is the engine of Douglas Preston and Aletheia Preston's thriller Paradox. It doesn't tell you whether aliens exist or settle who Jesus was. Instead, it drives toward a suffocating choice. Three people who learn the truth take the sole piece of evidence, a cue-ball-sized object pulled years earlier from a crashed craft, and sink it in a lake, swearing never to speak of it again. But, fourth, the novel ends there, replacing explanation with silence. Which leaves one question: what did they see that was worth burying under a vow of eternal silence? Episode 1: The Shrouded Body and the Stolen Skull. At 4 o'clock on a dark Roman morning, Brother Padraig O'Halloran entered the side chapel of the Basilica of San Silvestro and lit a candle. The flame caught the glass cube on the altar, and behind the glass, the wax head of St. John the Baptist stared out with brown, sunken eyes. The head was life-sized, modeled in wax centuries ago, and laid into its cranium was a large fragment of the saint's actual skull, visible through a small opening in the wax. Brother Padraig had prayed before this relic every morning for 19 years. He knew every crack in the wax, every shadow the candlelight threw across the saint's cheekbones. He knelt and prayed. When he rose, something caught his attention, a shift in the silhouette inside the glass. He dragged a heavy wooden pew closer, climbed onto it, and peered down through the top of the cube. The skull fragment had moved. Not fallen, moved, and where a continuous edge of bone had been yesterday, there was now a gap. A square centimeter of skull was simply gone. The edges were smooth, cut. Fine bone dust had settled onto the crimson velvet beneath. Brother Padraig's legs gave out. He sat down hard on the pew, gasping, one hand clutched to his chest. Someone had sawed a piece out of the head of John the Baptist. Someone had committed sacrilege inside the basilica, and he had been the one to find it. Within the hour, Cardinal Collini summoned Brother Niel Armagh and charged him with quietly retrieving the stolen fragment. Righted. The call in the gym, 6,000 miles west and a world away from Roman basilicas, CBI agent Frankie Cash was losing a battle with a rowing machine. The Orange E3 studio in Grand Junction hummed with exertion, treadmills slamming, stationary bikes whirring, and Cash's heart rate monitor flashed orange. Up. She was 41, fit in a compact, efficient way, and profoundly irritated by the instructor's cheerfulness. Then her phone buzzed. She recognized the number. Sheriff Colcord of Eagle County, Red. Cash stepped off the machine and took the call in the hallway. The sheriff's voice came through without preamble. "We've got a homicide up in the flat tops. Body in a cabin on Solitary Lake. Coins on the eyes, wrapped in a white shroud." Cash felt her pulse change. Coins on the eyes, white shroud. The signature of the Neander killings, the same species of hominid escapes from the Erebus disaster that had nearly killed her 18 months ago. The FBI had been hunting them for 8 months with nothing to show. Now Colcord was calling her. "Is this a Neander case?" she asked. "Could be. I requested you." Cash was already moving. She drove to CBI headquarters in Grand Junction, where the rivalry was immediate. Agent George Standish, younger, slicker, and hungry, was already in Director Holmes' office, making his pitch. Cash could see him through the glass, leaning forward, hands gesturing, selling himself as the right agent for a high-profile case. Holmes was listening. Cash didn't knock. She walked in, and when Holmes' gaze shifted, she made her argument in a single sentence. Colcord had asked for her. She knew the Neander case cold. She had earned this. Holmes gave her the case. Standish got digital forensics support. He left the office with a tight jaw and a look that said he would remember this. The hike in. Cash and Colcord met at Forest Service Road 610 and hiked the final miles to Solitary Lake on foot. The trail climbed through spruce and fir, the air thinning, the sounds of the highway falling away. An elk herd startled them near a meadow, hooves pounding, antlers flashing, and by the time they crested the ridge and looked down at the lake, both were breathing hard. The cabin sat at the water's edge, a lopsided structure of weathered pine and corrugated metal. But it was the yard that stopped Cash cold. Dozens of sculptures rose from the weeds, a skeleton welded from angle iron and rebar, a horned monster assembled from shredded tires, a china doll with a metal beetle emerging from its mouth. Willy Grooms' junk art, ugly and inventive, and watching them, a man stood near the cabin, Paul Brooksfield, the victim's brother-in-law. He was 50-ish, sunburned, and his hands were shoved into his pockets like he was trying to disappear into his own jacket. Cash asked him to wait while they established a perimeter, and she noted how his eyes kept moving toward the lake, unwilling to settle on the cabin door. She also noted something else. Near the sculptures, an overturned bucket had been moved recently. A frying pan lay on its side, exposing a patch of yellow grass beneath. Someone had been searching the junk. Carefully, methodically, leaving almost no trace. Someone had been looking for something. The body on the kitchen table. Cash and Colcord entered the cabin together. The smell hit first chemical, cloying like a funeral home crossed with a hoarder's basement. The small room was packed floor to ceiling with broken furniture, stacks of library books, rusted tools, and unidentifiable debris. A faded curtain hung across the doorway to the kitchen. Colcord knelt by the cot and dragged out a metal cash box. Inside, 2 rolls of $100 bills, several gold nuggets, a handful of Morgan silver dollars, and a hand-drawn map. The map showed a mine tunnel winding into a mountainside, with notations in pencil, CH through, and a strange symbol like a rotated letter J. Gas hazards, the sheriff said. Whoever drew this knew the mine was dangerous. They pushed through the curtain into the kitchen. Willy Grooms lay on the table. He was dressed in an old-fashioned white linen nightgown, his arms folded across his chest, his bare feet pointed toward the ceiling. Silver dollars had been pressed into his eye sockets, not placed, but pressed, the skin around them bruised. A small wound, no wider than a pencil, marked the base of his neck. His right foot was crushed, the bones visibly displaced, blood still dark on the table beneath him. But it was the face that held Cash. Groom's long beard, which Paul had described, was gone. The skin was smooth, almost waxy, and the lips had been sewn into a faint, peaceful smile. He looked embalmed. He looked like a saint laid out for veneration. Colcord said nothing for a long moment. Then he exhaled, a sound somewhere between a sigh and a curse. "It's the same," he said. "The coins, the shroud." Cash didn't answer. She was counting the ways this scene was different from anything the Neanders had done. The Neanders killed brutally, directly. They didn't sew smiles onto faces. They didn't dress their victims in nightgowns. They didn't embalm. What the autopsy found. The medical examiner, Dr. Chris Huizinga, did the autopsy 2 days later in the CBI lab. Cash was there, watching through the observation window as Huizinga made his initial examination. She saw him pause when he reached the stomach contents. The briefing came that afternoon. Huizinga's assistant, a young woman named Zubriski, had been the one to identify the unusual finding. Willy Grooms' stomach had been full of half-digested crackers and red wine when he died, crackers stamped with a cross and the image of the Lamb of Christ, communion wafers, sacramental wine. Further investigation traced the wafers to a single source, the Convento di Santa Chiara al Freduccio in Penn, Italy. No other church in the world used these particular wafers. Someone had brought them to Colorado, thousands of them, and fed them to Willy Grooms during the 3 days he was being tortured. Because he had been tortured. The crushed foot was the work of a Spanish boot, an iron vise that shattered bone one turn at a time. The small wound at his throat was an embalming incision, the first cut made while Grooms was still alive, the petechiae in his eyes proving it. His own eyes had been removed with a spoon. A device called a Maunder's screw gag had held his mouth open while the wafers were pushed down his throat. The killers had embalmed a living man, and they had given him communion while they did it. Cash sat in the briefing room after Huizinga finished, her notebook open to a blank page, and felt the shape of the case shift beneath her. This wasn't a Neander killing. This was ritual. This was religious. Ergie Brooksfield. The Brooksfield Ranch spread across 500 acres of irrigated pasture at the base of the flat tops. Cash and Colcord drove up a long gravel road past cattle pens and a barn to reach the main house, where Margie Brooksfield was waiting for them on the porch. She was a small woman in her late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of tan that came from a lifetime of working outdoors. Her eyes were red, and she held a balled-up tissue in one fist. But she was calm. She invited them in, offered coffee, and answered their questions without hesitation. She had known Willy Grooms for 15 years. He was her husband's half-brother, a schizophrenic who had chosen to live off the grid rather than take medication. Margie had been his lifeline. She managed his finances. She took his junk sculptures to galleries in Denver. She visited him every week. She had been the one who found Father Moore to baptize him when Willy started talking about God. He was gentle, she said. He was scared of a lot of things, but he was never angry. He never hurt anyone. Cash noted the way Margie's voice tightened when she mentioned her husband Paul. Paul had resented the time she spent with Willy. Paul had asked Willy to stop leaning on her so much. Paul had been the one to find the body. Then Cash asked about visitors, and Margie hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. No, she was sure Willy would have told her if anyone else had come by. Colcord asked about the sat phone. Margie admitted she let Willy use it, even though he was terrified of technology. He had told her it was worth the risk. But when the sheriff asked to see the phone records, Margie's eyes went hard. She refused. Client confidentiality, she said. She was a financial planner. She couldn't just hand over private information. Cash let the silence stretch. In it, she watched Margie's composure shift from grief into something more guarded, something that looked a lot like fear. The priest, Father Moore, received them in the rectory of St. Mary's Church, a whitewashed stone building with a modest spire and 2 spruce trees framing the door. He was a thin man in his 60s, with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. Trotno. He addressed Cash as policewoman. He remarked that he was not accustomed to being interrogated by one. He folded his hands on his desk and radiated a patience that felt like condescension polished to a high shine. Cash asked about Willy Grooms' baptism. The priest confirmed he had performed it, but when she asked what Willy might have confessed in the weeks before his death, his expression went ecclesiastical. The seal of the confessional. He could not speak of it. He would not. Cash pressed. The temperature in the room rose. The priest's smile tightened. Colcord shifted in his chair. And then Cash said something she would regret. I was an obedient Catholic until I heard what our priest was doing to boys in the sacristy. The words came out cold and level. Father Moore's face went still. A moment later he stood, announced the interview was over, and walked out. On the rectory steps, Colcord grabbed Cash's arm. What the hell was that? Cash was shaking. She knew she had just handed the priest a weapon. A complaint. An allegation of bias. If Father Moore called Director Holmes, Cash could lose the case. She drove back to the motel in silence, her career suddenly feeling like a fragile thing balanced on the edge of a very high shelf. The phone records. Despite Margie's refusal, the warrant came through. Cash and Colcord spread the sat phone records across the conference table and started cross-referencing. A single number appeared again and again, 7 calls, all made during Margie's visits to the cabin, all within the 3-day window when Willy Grooms was being tortured. The number belonged to Javi Castillo, a professor of exobiology at a small college in San Francisco. Former professor. Castillo had been fired 2 years earlier for scientific fraud after doctoring UAP videos to make them appear more compelling. He ran a blog now, a fringe operation that claimed alien contact was a settled fact but warned against assuming the visitors were benevolent. Colcord made the call. Castillo answered on the second ring. When the sheriff identified himself and mentioned Willy Grooms' name, there was a long silence. Then Castillo said, "How do I know you are who you say you are?" and hung up. Cash booked a flight to San Francisco, vetted, then the Battery Club. The Battery Club occupied a converted warehouse in the financial district, and Cash hated it immediately. She was underdressed, she was irritable, and the receptionist treated her like a delivery driver who had wandered in through the wrong door. She waited in a lobby full of modern art and investment bankers until Castillo appeared. He was handsome in a careful, curated, way-tanned fit, his gray hair trimmed short. He walked with a faint irregularity in his gait, and when he sat down and crossed his legs, Cash saw the titanium prosthetic where his lower right leg should have been. Castillo led her to a hidden room behind a bookcase, accessed by rubbing the head of a Woodrow Wilson bust. The green room, he called it, soundproofed, private, a place where serious conversations could happen without being overheard. He told her about the UAP crash. 10 years earlier, Willy Grooms had been prospecting in the flat tops when he saw a fireball streak across the sky and impact the shoulder of Dome Peak. Unquote. By the time he reached the site, a gray disk the size of a compact car lay embedded in the granite, cracked open like an egg. Grooms had taken something from the wreckage. Something small, something powerful. He called it an artifact, the professor said. He believed the aliens came back later and cleaned up the crash site, but they didn't find what he took. Cash's expression didn't change. She had sat through countless interviews with people who believed impossible things. The key was not to react. And you think aliens killed him to get it back? Castello's face was perfectly serious. I think someone killed him to get it back. Whether they were human or not, I can't say. The leak. Back in Colorado, Cash and Colcord worked a canvas of burns that yielded exactly one useful lead. A local woman named Sassy Newton had seen flickering lights on Dome Peak around 10:30 on the night of June 5th. A hiker named Robert Drew confirmed it 4 or 5 bright lights moving across the western slope, bunching together before winking out at midnight. Then the reporter ambushed them. Reporter Robin Twen from KBFR caught them on the sidewalk outside the sheriff's office. Twen was young, sharp, and used they-them pronouns with a confidence that made Colcord visibly flustered. The reporter already knew about the UFO angle. They already knew about Cash's confrontation with Father Moore. They asked whether the CBI was pursuing an alien abduction theory in the Grooms murder, and Cash stammered through a non-answer while Colcord physically pulled her away. Someone was leaking. Someone inside the investigation was feeding Twen details. Cash added it to the list of things she couldn't control. The money. The warrant on Mountain View Bank produced the break Cash had been waiting for. The bank's president and general counsel tried to stonewall, citing privacy policies and jurisdictional objections, but Cash threatened to arrest them for obstruction, and the records appeared. Willy Grooms had been depositing large sums of gold for years. Nuggets, dust, small ingots, all of it converted to cash by Margie in transactions structured to stay just below the $10,000 reporting threshold. Over $2.5 million had flowed through her accounts. The final destination was a nonprofit called Paradox. Cash looked at the name on the printout and felt a cold click of recognition. The Fermi Paradox. The question Enrico Fermi had asked at lunch in 1950, where is everybody? The contradiction between the high probability of alien life and the total absence of evidence for it. Castello's organization. His money. But it was Margie's signature on every transfer. The interrogation. They brought Margie Brooksfield back in. This time, Cash didn't offer coffee. She spread the financial records across the table. The structured deposits, the $2.5 million. The will, naming Margie as Willy Grooms' sole beneficiary, with her own signature on the witness line. A will Margie claimed she had never seen before. Her lawyer, Belen Caldas, objected. Cash ignored her. She leaned forward and asked the question that had been building since the first day at the cabin. Did you kill him for the money? Margie's face crumpled. She admitted she had kept $220,000 from the transfers money she used to pay her daughter's medical bills, money she had taken without Willy's knowledge. But she had not killed him. She had not known about the will. She had loved him. She was sobbing now, her composure shattered, her lawyer trying to pull her back from the table. Cash watched her and felt the familiar hollow sensation of a case that was both breaking open and refusing to close. The financial planner had motive. She had opportunity. But something about the way she cried didn't feel staged. The arrest at the cabin. While Cash was interrogating Margie, Deputy Maureen Clausen was patrolling the trail up to Solitary Lake. The cabin had been processed weeks ago, but the crime scene tape still fluttered in the wind, and someone needed to keep the curious away. Deputy Clausen heard the hammering before she saw him. A man in expensive hiking gear was moving through the junk sculptures, swinging a rock hammer and breaking open welded seams. When she shouted, the man bolted through the cabin window, scrambled to his feet, and ran. He made it 50 yards before his prosthetic leg caught a root, and he went down hard. It was Castillo. He was polite, calm, and refused to say a word without his lawyer. Colcord interviewed him in the holding cell. The professor pleaded the fifth until the sheriff mentioned the felony charges, and the bail amount, and the legal fees that came with both. Then Castillo started talking. He had come back for the artifact. Grooms had hidden it somewhere at the lake before he died. It was worth more than any sum of money Castillo could name. It was proof real, Physical proof that humanity was not alone in the universe. Colcord listened, thanked him, and offered him a deal. Leave Colorado tonight, never come back, and the charges would disappear. Stay and face the full weight of a felony vandalism charge with a public defender who wouldn't understand the first thing about alien artifacts. Cash was furious. By the time she learned what had happened, Castillo was already on a plane to San Francisco. Colcord had let their best lead walk. He's a nut, the sheriff said. He was wasting our time. He was connected to the murder, Cash shot back. He was connected to the money. He was connected to Margie, but it was done. Castillo was gone, Margie was lawyered up, and the only new information was a single word that kept appearing in the financial records, a name for the organization that had swallowed $2.5 million of Willy Grooms' gold. Paradox. Cash sat in the darkened conference room that night, alone, the documents spread out around her. She thought about the communion wafers from Italy, the crushed foot, the silver dollars pressed into dead eyes. She thought about the lights on Dome Peak, and the hidden room in San Francisco, and the fear in Castillo's voice when Colcord had said Grooms was dead. Someone had tortured a man for 3 days while feeding him the body of Christ. Someone was still looking for something at the bottom of a mountain lake, and somewhere in Rome, a sliver of a saint's skull was traveling toward Colorado in the pocket of a man who had not yet appeared on anyone's radar. Cash closed her eyes. She had a feeling the worst of this was still ahead. Episode 2, The Dismembered Professor and the Ghost of Paradox. Tyler Hill sat on a flat rock at the edge of McMillan Lake, his shoulders pink and hot under the afternoon sun. Lacy flowers lay beside him, the grapes of wrath propped over her face. Walter Towles was on the far end of the rock, pulling on a vape and staring at nothing. It was 92 degrees, the air thick and still, and Tyler had already swum out to the middle of the lake twice just to cool off. He decided to do it again. He stood, shook out his legs, and dove. The water closed over him, cold and dark. He opened his eyes. The lake bottom was about 15 feet down, silty and featureless except for a dark rectangular shape half buried in the mud. He surfaced, cleared his eyes, then dove again to get a better look. It was a suitcase. A big one, the kind you check at the airport, with reinforced corners and a nylon shell. Tyler grabbed the handle. It was heavy. Heavier than clothes and shoes would make it, and it took him 2 tries to wrestle it up to the shallows. Lacy had put her book down. Walter had his phone out, recording. Tyler flipped the latches and opened the case. Inside, a human face stared up at him from a tangle of limbs in dark water. The face was bloated, skin the color of old cheese, lips pulled back from teeth in a grimace that was not quite a smile. An arm, detached at the shoulder, lay crosswise across a thigh. A left foot, was wedged into the corner. The foot was crushed, the bones flattened in a way that made Tyler's stomach lurch. He stumbled backward, retching. Walter kept filming. Lacy started screaming. A gold ring glinted on one of the fingers. Tyler, for reasons he would never be able to explain, reached down and pulled it off the whole finger. Bloated and violet came with it. He dropped it into the shallows and scrambled for the shore. The pro-aesthetic leg. Sheriff Colcord pushed through the crowd at the McMillan Lake trailhead with his jaw set. Protesters were everywhere, shouting anti-Neander slogans, waving signs that read PROTECHUMANBORDERS and NORIGHTSFORPREDATORS. The viral video of the dismembered body had drawn them like blood in the water, even though nothing about the murder suggested Neander involvement. He ducked under the crime scene tape and found Cash already inside the privacy tent, her face rigid with fury. "Took you long enough," she said. 4 suitcases sat on plastic tarps on the ground, their lids open. The body parts inside had been arrayed by an mess team, pieces of a man arranged in approximate anatomical order like a macabre puzzle. The head was separate, the torso had been bisected. The limbs had been cut at the joints with a reciprocating saw, and in the 3rd suitcase, nestled among coils of intestine, was a prosthetic leg. Cash pointed at it. Titanium. High-end. Looks familiar. Colcord remembered the way Javier Castillo had crossed his legs in the Battery Club, the metallic gleam of the artificial calf. He knelt beside the case and examined the foot, what was left of it. The metatarsals were crushed, the tarsals flattened, the lower leg bones splintered. The exact same pattern as Willy Grooms. "They dismembered him with a saw," Romansky said, appearing beside them. The detective's face was pale beneath his usual calm, but they tortured him first. Same MO, same Spanish boot. Same everything. Except the embalming, Cash said quietly. Grooms was embalmed alive. Castillo wasn't. Romansky nodded. Different treatment for different victims, or different killers within the same group. Cash stared at the prosthetic leg, at the crushed foot that matched Groom's crushed foot, and felt a case shift under her. 2 victims now. Same torture devices, same ritualistic staging, or most of it, pod. And the one man who might have explained the connection, Javier Castillo, was now dead, his body spread across 4 suitcases at the bottom of a lake. The UFO convention. Cash flew to Santa Fe the next morning. Paradox had been Castillo's organization, and Castillo was dead, but the money trail didn't end with him. $2.5 million had flowed from Willy Grooms' gold through Marky Brooksfield's accounts and into a nonprofit that no one seemed to know anything about. Cash needed to understand what Paradox actually was. The convention occupied the Lumpkins Ballroom of the La Fonda Hotel, a turquoise and terracotta space filled with folding tables and earnest people selling books about ancient astronauts, government cover-ups, and the coming disclosure. Cash moved through it with her badge in her pocket and her skepticism on her face. She stopped at a booth labeled TUNGUSKA 1908. THESMOKINGGUN. The man behind the table was 60-ish, with a white goatee and a name tag that read EARLWIELD. Paradox, Cash said, after introducing herself. You know it? Earl's eyes lit up. Sure, Fermi paradox. The contradiction between the high probability of alien life and the total lack of evidence for it. Castillo's group. His face fell. I heard about what happened to Javi. Terrible. He was a good man. What did Paradox do? Research, data collection. Javi was convinced the evidence was out there. He just thought we were looking in the wrong places. Earl leaned forward conspiratorially. He had this theory that UAPs follow a pattern, that they're not random, that someone or something is running a program. Did he have funding? Oh yeah, serious money. Javi never said where it came from, but it wasn't from selling t-shirts. Earl glanced around the ballroom. You should talk to Lila Castleton. She was close to him. Lila Castleton was a small woman with dyed red hair and the exhausted eyes of someone who had been grieving for a while. She agreed to talk when Cash showed her badge, but she refused to be recorded. Javi was obsessed, Castleton said. They were sitting in a quiet corner of the lobby, away from the conference noise, not with little green men, with data. He believed UPs left traces, physical evidence that could be collected and analyzed. He said we'd been ignoring the most important evidence for 2,000 years. 2,000 years? Castleton's eyes shifted. She looked toward the door. There were rumors about Paradox backer. A European, someone with very deep pockets and a personal interest in Javis research. But I don't know the name. JV never told me. He said it was safer that way. Safer from what? Castleton stood up. I have to go. I'm sorry. I can't help you any more than this. She walked away fast, her heels clicking on the tile, and Cash was left with the feeling that she had just been told something important without being told what it was. The Vatican's man. Brother Armagh had been waiting in the sheriff's office for 40 minutes when Colcord finally came out to meet him. The Irishman was compact and still, dressed in a black clerical shirt with a white tab collar, his hands folded in his lap. He looked like a man who could wait forever if necessary. Sheriff Colcord, the receptionist said, this is the priest I told you about. Colcord had been dealing with cranks all week. The Castile video had drawn them from everywhere, psychics claiming to sense the killer, amateur sleuths with elaborate theories, one man who insisted the murder was the work of interdimensional vampires. A priest was a new variation, but not by much. Father Colcord said, not bothering to hide his impatience. I'm very busy. What can I do for you? I am Brother Armagh of the Palatine Order at the Basilica of San Silvestro in Rome. I have been sent by the Vatican. The Vatican, yes. Armagh's voice was even. A relic was stolen from our basilica several weeks ago, a fragment of the skull of St. John the Baptist. The thief has been identified as a man named Javier Castillo. I have been charged with recovering the relic. Colcord stopped. Castillo? The same Javier Castillo who was just pulled out of McMillan Lake in pieces? Armagh's expression didn't change. Yes, the same. Colcord rubbed his jaw. And the relic, what is it, exactly? Size, appearance? A square centimeter of bone, cut from the skullcap of the wax reliquary. Dark brown, waxy in texture. It would be kept in a sealed container of some kind. A vial, most likely. Cash had found a glass vial in Castillo's gym locker at the Battery Club. Inside it was a small brown square, half the size of a pinky nail. She had brought it back to Colorado as evidence. Why didn't you report the theft to the police? Colcord asked. The Vatican does not always involve civil authorities in matters of this nature. We preferred to handle it quietly. And now Castillo is dead, and you want us to find your relic. Armagh met his eyes. I want the relic returned to the church, yes, but I am also prepared to assist your investigation. The theft and the murders are connected. I believe the relic is at the center of what is happening. Colcord stared at him for a long moment. Then he picked up the letter Armagh had left with him, the one with the Vatican phone number. He dialed it on his desk phone and spoke for 5 minutes in low, careful tones. When he hung up, his expression had changed. All right, Brother Armagh, let's talk. The formal interview. They brought Armagh into the conference room an hour later. Cash was there, along with Colcord and a recording device set up in the center of the table. The Irishman sat down with the same composed stillness he had shown in the waiting area. Tell us how Castillo stole the relic, Cash said. Armagh described it in precise clinical detail. Castillo had entered the Basilica of San Silvestro during the night, using a device that tripped the circuit breakers and disabled the alarm system. He had approached the side chapel, where the wax reliquary of St. John's head was displayed, opened the sealed glass cube, and used a fine-toothed surgical saw to cut a square centimeter piece from the exposed skullcap. Then he had repaired the damage so skillfully that the theft went unnoticed for nearly a week. He had an accomplice, Armagh said, a man named Joaquim da Silva, Portuguese. He was the one who disabled the alarms. The Vatican investigation identified both of them. Castillo was Jewish, Cash said, yes, so his motive wasn't religious. Armagh inclined his head. No, we do not believe so. Then why did he want a piece of a saint's skull? Armagh was quiet for a moment. I was hoping you might be able to tell me that. The Vatican's interest is in recovering the relic and avoiding scandal. We have not investigated Castillo's personal motives. Cash leaned back. She thought about the communion wafers in Willy Grooms' stomach, the Italian convent where they had been pressed, the careful, ritualistic staging of the body. She thought about Castillo's claim that Grooms had found an alien artifact from a UAP crash site. None of it fit together yet, but the pieces were starting to form a shape. What will you do with the relic when you find it? She asked. Return it to the basilica, restore it to its proper place, and if someone else tries to take it, Armagh's eyes were steady. Then I will do whatever is necessary to protect it. I have taken a vow to recover the relic. I will not leave Colorado without it. Quit it. The case meeting. Director Holmes called the meeting in the CBI conference room at 8 the next morning. Cash, Colcord, Romansky, and the district attorney's office were all present. D.A. Attawale brought his deputy, a young woman with sharp eyes and a river of brown curls named Nova Euclid. Huizinga presented the Castillo autopsy first. The pathologist's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she clicked through the slides. Castillo had been tortured before death exactly as Willy Grooms had been tortured, the same Spanish boot crushing the metatarsals and tarsals of the right foot, the same garrote vil tightened around the throat to the point of strangulation without killing. The same precise, knowledgeable use of historical Inquisition devices. But Castillo had not been embalmed. He had not been fed communion wafers. His body had been dismembered with a reciprocating saw and submerged in weighted suitcases, a disposal method that was brutal and efficient rather than ritualistic. Different treatment, Cash said. Why? Huizinga shook her head. I can only tell you what was done, not why. Holmes took over. She summarized the case against Margie Brooksfield. The financial transfers, the will, the eyewitness who placed Castillo at the Brooksfield ranch the day before his death. Philip Ross was a private investigator who had been watching the ranch for reasons that remained unclear. He had seen Castillo arrive in the morning, had seen the shouting match with Margie on the porch, had seen Paul Brooksfield chase Castillo off the property with a rifle. Brooksfield denied knowing Castillo, Euclid said. Her voice was firm, but there was a flicker of something uncertain in her eyes. She lied. That gives us probable cause for arrest. Colcord agreed. Cash, who had watched Margie Brooksfield sob and stammer and insist on her innocence, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. The evidence was solid. The motive was clear. But something about the way Margie had cried, the raw, uncalculated shock of it, didn't feel like guilt. The arrest was set for the next morning. The riot at the ranch. Nova Euclid had never worn a bulletproof vest before. It was heavy and hot, and it made her feel like she was suffocating before the operation even began. Officer Cassian Wiley, blonde, handsome, with a crooked nose that had been broken once and set imperfectly, helped her clip the ballistic helmet under her chin. "You're gonna do great," he said, and smiled at her in a way that was entirely too warm for a professional setting. The convoy rolled out at 4:30 in the morning, 10 vehicles moving through the darkness toward the Brooksfield ranch. Euclid was there as legal oversight to ensure the arrest was clean and the evidence was preserved. She sat in the back of an SUV with her case files clutched in her lap, her heart hammering. They saw the protesters before they reached the gate, tents and signs and a crowd of 50 or 60 people blocking the road. Some of them held baseball bats, some of them were shouting. The vehicle stopped, the shouting got louder. A rock hit the windshield of Euclid's SUV, spiderwebbing the glass. She flinched. Then the door was wrenched open from the outside, and a masked teenager was pulling at her arm, dragging her out of the car. She hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of her. The teenager was screaming something she couldn't understand. She tried to crawl away, but the vest made her slow, and the helmet had slipped down over her eyes. She couldn't see. She couldn't breathe. Then Wiley was there, hauling her up, shoving a gas mask over her face as tear gas bloomed white and thick across the scene. He pulled her toward an armored vehicle, his arm locked around her waist, and she clung to him with a desperation that was not at all professional. They found Margie Brooksfield in the escape SUV already handcuffed. She had surrendered voluntarily. She had come out of the house with her hands up, hoping to de-escalate the violence. It didn't work. A police SUV was on fire. The dry grass was catching. The air was thick with smoke and tear gas and the sound of people screaming. The Torture Museum. Romansky brought his husband with him to Dr. Hitch Baker's house. Nick Wu was a software engineer, not a cop, but he had a gift for putting people at ease, and Dr. Hitch. Baker was the kind of person who needed to be put at ease, an eccentric collector of historical torture devices who lived in a rambling Victorian filled with glass cases and velvet-draped displays. Baker showed them the thumbscrews first, then a Spanish tickler, then a garrotte-ville that made Romansky's stomach turn. The device was a metal collar with a screw mechanism designed to tighten slowly around the victim's neck until the vertebrae separated. "This model doesn't have the spike," Baker said, almost apologetically. The Catalan version had a spike that went into the spinal column. They used it in the Philippines until 1902. The Spanish used the one without the spike until 1978. "The Spanish boot," Romansky said. "Do you have one?" Baker's expression changed. "I don't. They're quite rare." The boot was an iron casing that fit around the foot and lower leg. Wooden or metal wedges were hammered in to crush the bones. He paused. "Why do you ask?" "And the Mondigag?" "The Speculamoris, also rare. A pear-shaped device inserted into the mouth and expanded to force the jaws open." Baker's voice had gone quiet. "These are very specific instruments. Inquisition era. Are they relevant to a current case?" Romansky looked down into the display case beside the garrotte-ville. A small brass label, tarnished green at the edges, read, "Spanish boot, replica, Inquisition tribunal procedure, Iberia, etc., 1610. He remembered the crushed bones in Willy Grooms' foot, the same pattern in Castillo's foot, the communion wafers, the embalming, the silver dollars pressed into dead eyes. A tribunal procedure. Someone had studied this. Someone was following a script.